see here. All right. So as people arrive, we'll just get them leaving us a comment in the chat bar so we know that people are here. Just say hello, names, where you're from. And I'm just going to do a quick introduction for us, and then we'll pass it along to the Worktango guys. So my name is Elise. I work for TCC Canada, and we are an A to Z business solution provider. We do everything from virtual office spaces all the way up to permanent office spaces with co-working and meeting spaces as well. So if you just need a business address, we have that. If you need a permanent office for renting, we have those as well. We also just offer meeting rooms if you just need to pop in every once in a while. We do things on a month-to-month basis, so we're really flexible when it comes to your workspace. We're going to be doing webinars throughout the next couple of weeks just to keep people connected and give them as much information as possible to help run their business in this changing time. So we'll pass it along to Rob from Worktango. They're going to be running our webinar today for us.
Awesome. Well, first off, thanks TCC and team for having me here today. I have a couple people filtering in. Want to make it interactive, so there's a little chat bar in Zoom. Maybe you could tell me kind of where you're in from today. One word to describe how you're feeling. Isolated, you can't use as a word, but I'd just like to get people using the chat function to make sure you know where it is when we use it later. No one seems to have gotten there yet. Oh, there we go. Excited to learn. Okay, I'll kind of keep an eye on those as well. One thing to note as well is as I'm looking around all these screens, I have a bunch of stuff going on. We got positive, engaged. Okay, that's good to know. For some of you that have met me before, this is not what I look like. This is literally an isolation beard that I've been growing. It's kind of like the NHL playoffs. I won't shave it until this thing is done. For my friends in Ottawa, the playoffs are things that you play after you have a good regular season. I'm kidding. I'm a Toronto Maple Leaf fan, so I'm going to take some shots at my friends in Ottawa over there. Another Toronto as well, so that's good to hear. I just saw in the chat. But basically what we want to talk about today and is really kind of the topics here on the screen: how to engage employees in uncertain times. Some people and companies may be in this situation right now, right? Having to let people go, or having people, requirements your employees to do more with less, and go out of their comfort zone and do things that are a little different. So there seems to be uncertainty above and beyond just the workplace today. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. And this session's about how do you engage those people, your talent and staff moving forward. So just a bit of things on an introduction. So if you don't know what that is, that's a Bitmoji. It's supposed to be a representation of what you look like and what you're feeling. This is clearly a younger version and less gray-haired version of myself, but I can make it whatever I want. My name is Rob Catalano. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer of a company called Worktango, and spend most of my time with these two organizations, Worktango and Innovate Work. Basically co-founded these two over the last number of years. And the first one is really around hearing the voice of employees. So when you think about understanding employees' engagement, measuring it, and obviously helping companies down that road, it's what I spend a lot of time doing. And Innovate Work is another way of have events to bring the business and HR community together. And for the last 17, 18 years, this is what I've done. Build HR technology companies on helping companies keep employees engaged, advise organizations on how to approach engagement in their company. So it's clearly something I am super passionate about. Above and beyond all that as well, I spent some time in other communities, one in the UK called Engage for Success. It's basically with the UK government sharing insights and evidence on why engagement is important in organizations. And on the right there, the Enterprise Engagement Alignment. So I chair Canada for really building certifications and ISO certifications around engagement. So if you can't tell yet, super passionate about this. And my goal is to kind of take a wisdom of crowds approach, all the things I've learned, and share with you. And I've been through a couple of crises in my time, whether it was the financial one, can share a lot of those best practices, which my plan is to do today. This was all really about work, but a couple other things to know about me. I'm a gold Olympic medalist in skiing in 2012. So really cool part of my life. And I spent a lot of time working part-time with the CSIS, the Security Intelligence Service in Canada. So outside of business, I keep myself busy in other ways. Hopefully you didn't believe those. Those were completely jokes. I do not do those two things. The best of what I do is in the background of my video is play guitar in a metal band. So that's maybe one cool thing about me that you wouldn't know from my business resume. So I don't know how many people were buying that, but put on the chat if you did. Hopefully I got 1 or 2 people. I literally last minute threw a couple of slides in there because I realized it was April Fool's Day, and hopefully that inspires you to fool some of I guess the people not you're working with, maybe online, but maybe at home in person, as most of us are working at home today. So what I want to, someone said you got me. That's good. I like that, Leanne. So a couple things. When I think about this topic, this is the best picture that I can illustrate what a lot of people are feeling right now, right? It's this wave of uncertainty that's coming. And that uncertainty is coming from different layers, different, different information out there. And it's a bit bigger than most uncertain moments that were happening now, especially with, with the global crisis, with COVID. And when you start thinking about this, some of the stuff that's going out there, we're typically looking and getting, shared on the news of things like this, right? The stock index returns are dropping dramatically, no matter, what, what index you're looking at, S&P 500 or the FTSE. You start looking at things like this where, we just went through the worst week of the FTSE 100, worse than the dot-com bubble, financial crisis, Black Monday. I've actually been in the workplace throughout all those things. So it kind of ages me in terms of how long I've been doing this. But there's a lot of this uncertainty going on. But if you want some positive news, frozen concentrated orange juice is the best performing commodity right now. So, if you have nothing to do at home and you want to invest, frozen concentrated orange juice is apparently the way to go. The BBC with some, heartbreaking evidence and news out there, sharing some bright parts of this world. But what's interesting is we look at all these numbers, but then you start seeing, well, what does this really mean? Not just a market, but at an organizational level. And who would have known? Yeah, I know. I had no idea. This is pretty cool. But the other thing that's interesting is when you start looking at businesses, not the markets, it's starting to really hit home, right? Indigo with layoffs, the city of Thunder Bay laying off all departments, WestJet, 6,900, employees. I think just yesterday, Air Canada was something in the 16,000 employees. And now you start thinking outside of just, businesses, it's more than just the markets. And we always think about these types of industries like, aviation and aircrafts, but it's happening with manufacturing and technology. Ecobee laid off 10% of staff. Wrangle laid off a number of employees. So it's a little more hard hitting when it starts getting into the business and some of the other things that are getting publicized out there. And actually, what I just want to share with anyone out there, there's a really cool site out there called Candor that is having a live update based on what's happening across all industries. This isn't just 1 or 2 industries that's impacting. Over 1,000 companies you're seeing, in energy, 91% of companies are freezing or laying off. Automotive, 90%. And this actually updates live on that website. So it might be a cool resource to take a look at. But again, it's not just the markets, it's impacting actually companies. But then I wanted to take that next layer of stories. Well, what about the employees within those companies themselves? This is really what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about today. And by the way, when you Google employees in Google, this is what comes up. And I don't know about you, but this looks exactly like my workforce. I don't know. When I find funny things like this, I like putting them in these sessions because I don't know whose company looks like this, but it kind of makes me laugh. But I really want to start talking about employees. And what's really interesting about employees is that, I, at WorkTango, spent a lot of time thinking about our employees as, again, Chief Engagement Officer. That's what my focus is, making sure our team is engaged. And every single week, we ask our employees, how do you feel about work? We actually provide this service for all of our customers as well. We create really quick pulse surveys to get feedback in real time, to understand sentiment of employees about things like engagement or sentiment around things happening in the organization, sentiment around inclusion or diversity. Think of anything you might want to hear the voice of employees for. But what's interesting is that in the last 2 weeks, you'll notice a big shift, and this is real data from WorkTango employees. The first 3 bars are the 3 weeks starting at the end of February, and we actually have 100% of our employees that answer positively to the question, how do you feel about work this week? Right? It's a quick pulse of engagement of our team. And what happened is about 2 weeks ago, that started to drop, right? We changed the operations of what we were doing. We came completely remote. It came up a little bit last week, but still there's some negativity there. So as a business leader, I'm not just looking at the market, I'm looking at our company performance and thinking about that. I'm thinking about the employees themselves and their sentiment and what they're feeling like. Clearly, the engagement is going down. And again, this isn't just a Worktango issue. We've actually been spending a lot of time looking at our data and seeing in the last 30 days, based on feedback we're getting from the customers we work across the globe, 42% of employees are less engaged than they were 30 days ago. 57% feel that the communication in the organization is worse than it was 30 days ago. And the outlook of the organization and questions that we ask about, confidence in the company being successful is down dramatically again. So the real point I really wanted to make here was that it's not just the market, and it's not just the companies, it's the individual employees that fuel those companies that clearly engagement is going down. And I don't know about everyone here, but actually, before I get into this point, how many people are binge watching Netflix right now? Like, please type in what you're watching. I need some more ideas. I've just finished The Tiger King. I'm in the Ozarks now, which is amazing, but I'm going to need something soon. So a couple of Tiger Kings came up here. I like that. Game of Thrones. I haven't watched one Game of Thrones yet. I got to think. A lot of people love The Tiger King. Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu. All right, I don't know that one, so I got to check that one out. Ozarks. So anyone that here knows Netflix, you probably know Stranger Things. And the point I want to make with this picture is that we are not in the upside down. And if you don't know what that is, I'm not going to explain it because you should definitely watch Stranger Things. But this is a reality. Like, things are really turned upside down right now. And the reason, the kind of reason we're getting together and what I want to talk about today are a couple of major things based on all of what's happening. First, I want to talk about the impact of uncertainty in the workplace and why it really, really matters, right? Why we need to be talking about it. Then I want to provide everyone on this call today 4 approaches to engage employees in uncertain times. So something that you can kind of sink your teeth into in 4 check boxes. Now, it's nice to hear those things conceptually, but I want to get back to where we start. So 5 considerations of where you should really start. And all along, my goal is to come up with some examples, right? To inspire action, to inspire things to do within your team, your organization, whether it be big or small. So we're going to cover these items today. And as we go through it, feel free to put questions in the Q&A, questions in the chat. We're going to try to do what we can to make this a little bit interactive as much as possible. So we're talking a lot about these items, and hopefully you're all here very interested in why engagement is important and why it matters. But if you're not convinced, also when you search up who cares in Google, this is the picture that comes out. There's no better picture than this, better than the searching employees and getting that image I showed you earlier. But before getting into everything, I want to talk about who cares. Like, why should we be thinking about this? Why should we be talking about engaging our employees through uncertainty? So a couple of things is that if you don't believe that employee engagement matters for your company, whether you're a CEO of it, a leader, just an employee, this is something you could look at later. I'm not going to go read all these items. Profitability goes up, productivity goes up, customer sat, quality, you name it, right? There's a lot of evidence around why engagement matters in companies. And if you don't like numbers and this kind of makes your head glaze over, think about what employee engagement isn't. And I always say that this is the best way I could describe disengagement. So this is what we don't want, right? We don't want our employees looking and feeling like this every single day. So whether it's metrics or this item, hopefully you can capture around why this is important that we're even talking about engaging our employees, and a big reason why I'm hoping everyone's here. But what's interesting is it's not just engagement in general that's important, but it's engaging employees through these uncertain times, right? Kind of the main topic of the conversation today. What I always like sharing is this idea that your employees, again, not just through a regular day, but through change and things that are changing around them, have a process they go to absorb this information that impacts their engagement overall. And what I mean by that is that when there's a change in an organization or an employee's personal life, the first thing that typically happens is denial, right? They're uncertain. This isn't happening. I'm not going to worry about it. It's those people that were running around playing in parks, not worried about, COVID-19 and the impact it could have. But then what happens is they get into more of a realization. And engagement pretty much stays the same in the organization. That employee is understanding that things are happening. But what happens is the changes around them, usually it's met with resistance or anger. And that resistance might be a change in their role. It might be, you have to work from home now. It might be things that they're temporarily laid off or get less working hours. So what's happening is over time, when employees are going through change, their engagement starts to go down in general, not just with this crisis, but just in general from a change perspective. And usually what happens is that it takes a little bit more time, but they're at a point where they're ready to let go, right? And some get there faster than others, some a lot longer, but this is a typical change curve on what an individual human being goes through. Now, what happens is usually at that bottom of the engagement curve, people are ready to just, quit or leave or do something different or not participate at all. And you start impacting the business in terms of all those metrics I showed you earlier. But what happens is once they start searching for insights and answers and they get more information, once they understand the meaning of change, it's only until then they start seeing engagement higher than where they first started, right? And then once they internalize it, understand the impact, usually they're at a higher curve. Now, the challenge and why we should need to talk about this is because it's not just why engagement is important, but all of our employees are going through this right now. They're going through it personally, right? They're going through it with what's happening externally. They may be going with what changes are happening in your organization. So it's just understanding how employees navigate through this. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is how do we make sure they don't get, from 1 to 4 and stay there. I want to accelerate getting from 1 to 6, 1 to 7 amidst all this uncertainty. So I always like sharing this kind of idea and concept because I think it really puts us in the right mindset of what we're talking about today, which is thinking of engaging those employees, right? Not fixing the business from a metric standpoint or some of the market details I showed earlier. So that being said, what I want to talk about is, as a next step is a lot of those employees, they're actually going through that change curve on many layers. Their job, the new remote work environment, changes to the organization, maybe personally in their lives. So again, everyone's going through giant change, which is why I really want to talk about the main kind of topic today, which is 4 approaches to engage employees in uncertain times. So the first one, and I go through 4 of them in pretty much detail. My goal is to give you some ideas and tips that you can take to your teams or your companies specifically. But the first one is there's no such thing as over communicating. Right? When there's uncertainty, you really need to bolster communication at the end of the day to build that alignment from an employee perspective. And some of the tips I want to share in terms of communicating in times of uncertainty is that first, you need to be honest and transparent. I mean, if transparency or authenticity isn't part of your value set or what you try to do on a daily basis, you really need to embrace it now. Because what we're finding is that a lot of studies out there have been showing, and one of my favorite ones is the Neuro Leadership Institute. They have some really great data on how people are influenced and their impact. But management transparency is the most significant predictor of employee happiness, right? Leaders that are more trustworthy are seen as more trustworthy and more effective. So when you're thinking about communicating, it's really that honesty and transparency that's really, really important, of letting people know where the company stands, where teams stand, etc. Because that whole secrecy idea, that erodes trust, right? It's really important to make sure that everyone's on the same page, because when they're already uncertain about the world around them and their job, when they're uncertain about what's happening in the company, right, and things aren't being transparent, that just puts them into a longer spin and it's harder to get them through the change. So first thing is, be honest and transparent about what's happening in your company, in the organization, as much as you can. Now, the second major point is don't just stop at telling people the what's. You need to really establish why. But you can't tell people that, we're changing our sales and marketing, approach because of what's happening with COVID, or we're, letting people go. You really need to get into the why. And once people understand the why, that's where they get into that curve I was showing you, where changes are internalized, they understand it, and they're not, stuck, uncertain about what this really all means. Really good example is just in the news yesterday, GE came up with the idea where they're actually lowering salaries for salaried employees to really, at the end of the day, save people that are on shift work. Now, if they just announce that, again, that's being honest and transparent of what's coming, what's happening. But then again, it still wouldn't be really impactful. It'd still be met with a lot of resistance. But when they started talking about why, like this is the impact on our numbers, on our customer success, on all the things that drive our business so we can be successful later, I'm not going to say everyone loved it, but they have to kind of understand the state of the nation. So think about if you're going to go communicate something to an individual employee or the whole organization as a CEO, you need to explain more of the why, because that's where people can really sink their teeth into this communication and why it's important. Now, the other part of communication is first just setting a frequent rhythm. So, during a crisis, people need to be informed. Like, I don't think it's crazy to actually have to communicate to your team on a daily basis, right? We do that every day. We get together in a team. If people have questions, we answer those questions. And the idea about the rhythm is that you change communication vehicles if necessary based on your rhythm you have today. So, for example, let's say, you're used to having communication about people's birthdays. Great. You can't do it on person anymore. Maybe you just do it on a video and share it that way. So there's just ideas here where a really good example is Hatch, which is a giant organization. I have someone I'm connected to, Joanne, on LinkedIn, where their CEO of a giant company is talking this morning live, keeping communication open, giving an update and answering questions. So that concept and idea about the frequent rhythm and changing communication vehicles, again, you're going to have to shift work, especially at this time. Or if you have workers in different capacities, not in the office, maybe from home, it's just making a sense that don't eliminate what you're doing now, right? Change the communication vehicles if you have to make sure the communication points are honest, transparent, and you're actually having them. Now, what's interesting is that the other real point is a lot of what you have to do when it comes to communicating to employees to keep them engaged is educate them. And I always say educate them with the source of truth. What I mean by that is that there's a lot of hearsay in crisis or uncertainty, right? Whether that's coming from the news, whether that's coming internally from employees. So I always like to say that if it's something like the COVID crisis, share with people how the organization is making decisions based on legislation from who, or what's coming out from the Canadian or US government, or whatever it is. But more importantly, be that source of truth if it's internal uncertainty. Right? If you're communicating every day, every week on what's happening, and you're the source of truth, now, again, there's no need for there to be hearsay in the organization, your employees talk to each other about that. So when you do these 4 things, again, that's where you start getting people out of that uncertainty and really start driving a more engaged workforce from that perspective. Now, typically when I talk about communication, people forget this really important last point. And remember, communication is 2-way, right? When I say communication and over communication is key, it's not just this is the information we have to blast to our employees to help get through uncertain times. And there's a couple of points I like to bring up when it comes to this concept of communication is 2-way, and hopefully some tips that you can take with your, again, team or whole organization. The first one is promote dialogue to build understanding. So what I mean by that is, even if you do communicate every day and you're telling people what's going on, you're being transparent, one way makes it really hard to get people's answers or to combat their uncertainty about what's being communicated. So if you promote that dialogue to build understanding, that's a really great way to do that. One thing that we do at WorkTango, and I see a lot of, and again, I've learned it from other companies as well, is every single day when we have our daily tango, that's kind of our daily meeting, there's an open dialogue. If people want to ask questions to leadership about what's happening with the current crisis, another crisis in the organization, whatever you want, they have the openness to do that. But sometimes, some people don't like to have it in that type of environment. They want it to be more anonymous. So every week we have an anonymous survey, again, that goes out through our platform where people can ask the leaders a question. Every Monday, we sit and we answer those. So again, it's promoting more of a dialogue and they're more involved as opposed to just communicating, this is what we're doing, this is why. So again, you have to kind of build a 2-way component to make it really, really valuable from that perspective. Now, the other thing that, what happens in communication and how to make it 2-way is elevate your employee listening. What I mean by that is there's organizations that might do an annual engagement survey. Well, that's great, but it's not giving you insights about what's happening in an uncertain time. So, again, using our experience at WorkTango, our customers, they're leveraging our platform to get feedback on how people are feeling about the COVID crisis. How are they feeling about their new remote work environment? It's not just about what they're feeling, but it's getting diagnostics, like understanding what would they recommend? Do they have any ideas? So when you elevate that on, and it doesn't have to be a survey, right? It can be in just an online forum, but the more that you listen to employees and you elevate that through uncertain times, that's where you're going to see a lot more engagement at the end of the day. And it's going to be important for decision-making at the leadership or executive level. Now, the third thing is really adopting an inclusive approach to planning. And what I mean by that is that don't only ask employees if they're doing well or not, kind of that example I shared with you, but ask them what they would recommend, right? And what happens is when you start getting employees involved in not just whether they're happy, but in their recommendations and part of planning, now they're more engaged in how they can support the company in that time. And what I found, and a lot of data finds, is that when you have that more inclusive approach, they're a part of it, that's where you see just a lot more engagement at the end of the day, as opposed to things being done to them, right? They're a part of helping the company get out of whatever crisis there is. So that was the first one, right? In terms of, one key approach is, again, over communication in the organization during these uncertain times. The second thing is you need to adapt, but don't stop the engagement rituals you already have, right? So don't throw the book out on what you're doing today to engage your talent or your staff. Hopefully you're doing things. If not, maybe this is a good time to start. But all those things are not only still relevant, but more relevant when you're going through an uncertain time in an organization. So a couple of ideas when it comes to adapting is that, first, just take stock of what your current rituals are. Like sometimes you forget to think about, maybe we do the daily meetings or monthly luncheons, or we do, quarterly updates, whatever it is, just take stock of what you actually do, right? And I'm sure that there's some communication level, some level of engagement, some events, parties, whatever it is, but get the quick list of what you actually do. And the next part of that is identify which rituals or programs or whatever you do in your organization are disrupted based on what's happening. Great example, right? People are working remote. Well, how do we change that? And find alternate ways to make it real. I used the example earlier of one of my customers that they literally get together and the CEO comes up and they do in-person birthday celebrations as a small example. Well, let's do it virtually. Or if people are in other time zones, record it and send it out later. So again, you don't have to disrupt that. You just have to find alternate ways to really make it real. Really good example at Worktango, we meet every Friday for drinks. Well, we can't do that when we're all sitting at home, right? So we actually got everyone on a call. We had people share what their favorite drink was and why. And again, we wanted to keep those rituals going. Another good example is on Friday, we have a quarterly review where we review our goals, we share recognitions in the organization. Well, again, we can't do that in person anymore. So we're going to have people get some lunch, come join, and do it via video. So again, just the advice is you can't stop those things when your employees are probably more disengaged based on what's happening around them. You want to keep some sense of normacy in what's happening in the organization from that perspective. And the third is be creative, right? Like make the best out of the situation. So any way you can, like how do you make sure you're doing something different given the environment? I'm using COVID as an example as an uncertain time, but this isn't just about COVID. But, I just saw these online. This is, what an awesome code science call today, including the children of our code scientists, right? They brought their children in, had a lot of fun. My gosh, I can only imagine how loud it was and how many people had to be on mute. But again, they were kind of just being creative and working with what they had. And also, I don't know who Brian Walsh is, but his the @ is the party cow, and I need to find more research on what that is. I just saw that. Another example is, another company said, here's what we're gonna, here's why we're staying at home, and they build engagement around something creative on that end. So again, just thinking about creative ways might make it better. And you know what? This may work in a current environment, but it may not lend itself well to things like healthcare or people that are actually, kind of the real heroes right now working there. Some companies are being creative. They're saying, go home. They'll give you a quick, video on your phone and send it to a company shared network or Slack channel or something like that. So again, you could still be creative, but just don't just adapt what you're doing. Don't eliminate what you're doing already when it comes to engaging employees at the end of the day. And the last part is that, it's hard to get people engaged doing what you're currently doing. So one other idea, and what I think companies are starting to do, especially in the current situation, is rally and unify for a bigger cause than the organization. So maybe you have specific values or virtues that you follow and you can tie into something there. Maybe you can be innovative in terms of coming up with ideas to help the situation. A couple of organizations have gone that route where Crocs is now rallying people around sharing free pairs for healthcare, right? And there's a team involved with making that a reality and the stories around it. Or Krispy Kreme making sure that, our healthcare workers have what they need. And again, this was, again, just for a larger cause, engaging the organization and people involved in these projects to do something bigger than themselves. Other examples, Hertz with free rentals for healthcare workers, or Starbucks giving, again, first responders and healthcare workers access to free coffees, as an example. And again, and when you look at these examples, you might think, oh, this is a big company, I can't do that stuff. But you can do stuff even if you're a small company. Like WorkTango is a small organization. We came up with an assessment of how people should hear the voice of employees for the COVID situation or remote work. And we shared that for free with people, right? We're doing what we can to try and help those organizations. And the other thing too is maybe you have nothing to give. Maybe your product or service or team size doesn't lend itself to that. Maybe be creative, right? I heard one company that they're not in the office, but they realized their parking lot is really close to a healthcare facility. So they made it clear to them that, hey, park there for free, right? We can try and help you get through this as well. Small examples, but if you can unify about something bigger than yourselves, I find that really helps engage people, right? A lot of people are trying to do their part, especially when they're stuck in isolation at home. So that was the second one. Now, the third is the concept that, emotional intelligence, or EQ, wins over IQ or intelligence during a crisis, right? Some would say that this is important across the board all the time. And I'd argue that this is important as well all the time, but I think it's more heightened during uncertainty and during a crisis. So to get a little deeper into this and how you can really focus on emotional intelligence, first things first is you really need to understand what employees are going through, right? You have to kind of understand what they're relating to, reflect on it. And what I've helped companies do in this in the past is there's 3 ways to think about uncertainty when you're talking to your individual employees, right? There's 3 layers. One is external. So there's an environment external to them that's impacting them. Again, COVID is a great example of that. We don't know when it's going to end. We don't know what it looks like. Right? Then there's organizational. So there might be changes happening in their organization today, whether it's remote work or company is changing in itself, right? We're having to switch things, shift things around. Or, individually, right? Maybe it's their job role, right? Maybe they're not doing the things they used to do. Maybe their status is uncertain. They don't know if they're going to have a job in a little while. And what's crazy about the immediate crisis is it's all 3, right? This is impacting all 3 of these items. So the reason why I bring this up is that if you can really understand what people are going through, that level of empathy goes a really long way. And one thing I've learned about empathy and doing some courses in the past is think about your employee that you're talking to and listen and understand them, right? Don't just listen, but understand what they're going to if you can. Acknowledge it, relate to it if you can. But if you can't understand it or relate to it, because it might be something you're not going through, you've never, not been able to pay bills or pay rent or whatever it is, you just have to be genuine in that conversation. And I know what a lot of people think when I talk about empathy and understanding what people are going through. They're like, what is this? Like, it's so fluffy. But there's a lot of data out there that shows that companies that have an empathetic employer are 93% more likely to stay. Right? And this is the thing this is the reason why engaging people, especially during uncertain times, is so important. Because these individuals, the ones that do stay through the crisis, you need them more now more than ever, right? They're the ones that are gonna have to do more with less, like just we talked about at the beginning. So this idea is that you want these people here to be empathetic back and provide you that support, especially when your organization is going through that tough time, but you have to give it first, right? And empathy is really important. And the last thing I'll say on this point is that people sometimes can't wrap their head around it. They don't realize, being empathetic is just lending a helpful ear. But how many people, know what this is? In the chat, maybe someone type what this is. I'm making sure everyone's awake and still paying attention. No one knows what this is? Yes, Shannon, the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If people don't know what it is, that's fine. This is back to HR 101 back in college and university. But the idea was these are the theory of human motivation for people, right? So the needs at the base are physiological needs. People need food, water, shelter, right? Then there's safety, security, stability. Then there's belonging. Then there's self-esteem, self-actualization, etc. But the reason why I want to bring this up is that think about your employees. Some of them are worried about their base needs, physiological, like will they be able to pay rent? right? It's April 1st. There's already a lot of concerns with that. They're worried about safety, security, stability. I've always said for your employees, if they have a job and they can, pay their bills and they feel like they're not getting fired next week, that's the base needs we have to do as employers and leaders, and really focus on the top three: belonging, self-esteem. But no one, if you're an employee and you can't have the bottom two, how are you going to think about achievement or self-actualization? So putting yourself into their mindset of, they might just be really stressed and worried about paying their bills or putting food on, or whatever it is. That's what you really need to think about when it comes to empathizing with those employees, because those might not be concerns for you independently. But hopefully this helps you relate and empathize with them as well. Now, I know Maslow created this many, many years ago. I think there's more needs now. I think there's like Wi-Fi. If we didn't have that and we were stuck at home, gosh knows how we would operate. There's battery, I think, which is the second layer. And then one I think that's really coming is toilet paper. For some reason, this has become the most important base need for people. We can't find it anymore. But yeah, to add some levity to the uncertainty that we're going through in terms of some of these conversations. So outside of understanding what employees are going through, my recommendation is really doubling down on gratitude. Remember, your staff is likely doing things that they're not used to doing. And gratitude is an intrinsic motivator. What gets recognized gets repeated. It has a huge impact on engagement. And guess what? It costs you nothing, right? The ability to recognize your employees based on what they're doing to help you get through this, your organization, their teams, whatever it is, you can do this very, very easily. Now, one thing, I've spent a lot of years in helping companies on their recognition strategies, but if you wanted one takeaway or point on how to double down and do gratitude and recognition right, I always say you can recognize with a little model called SMT. S is for specific, M is for meaningful, and T is for timely. So if you're going to recognize someone on your team, and do it, because again, it makes a huge impact, be very specific about what the behavior was, right? Like, thanks for going out of your way, changing your job role to shift to this new strategy and do X, Y, Z. The meaningful is the impact on our business is X, Y, and Z. You made a customer happy. You helped us get through this challenging time. We didn't have enough people to serve our customers on the grocery store floor. I've worked with some companies that people that are in HR are now answering phones in municipalities. So be very specific about how meaningful it is. And then the T is timely. Do it right away, right? When your folks and your employees are going out above and beyond and doing things, and you're waiting to the year-end meeting to give recognition, they're sitting there that whole time wondering why no one recognizes what they do. So if you are specific, meaningful, and timely, try today, find one employee or all of them, and be very specific in a written note, or get them on a phone and have that conversation. Hugely impacts emotional intelligence. And the last part is just connect on a deeper sense of purpose as well. So, what's interesting here is that, maybe you want to rally around your corporate values, or maybe you want to rally around the crisis that's happening right now, right? What we're going through today, again, is a lot bigger than just, a company crisis. But companies are starting to be creative, right? Burberry's making gowns and masks for, in their trench coat factory. Labatt's started making hand sanitizers, an example. So there might be a way that you can tie into a bigger purpose. And for some companies that don't have, all this money and the size, and they're large, you can be creative as well. I saw some cool organizations doing things to promote, physical distancing or social distancing, just with things like their logo. So again, when you rally around a larger purpose that really focuses on and it improves people's emotional intelligence as well. I love the Nike one. I think that's pretty brilliant, right? If you ever dreamed of playing for millions around the world, now's your chance. Play inside. Pretty great there. Last point I wanted to make was that enhance focus of your engagement to include well-being as well. And what I mean by that is that, yes, hopefully you're all on this call thinking about what can I do to engage my employees through these really tough times. But think about the well-being aspect of it as well. And what I mean by that is a couple quick points on engagement and well-being. First is that provide support where possible so you can just normalize their stress, right? Stress is a huge issue on individuals. We need people to bounce back from the stress that they're going through throughout this whole uncertain time. Again, external, internal, and organizationally. So think about the physical part of it, right? If people are working remote, how can we get them the resources that they need? How can we make sure we're having conversations frequently? If it's mental stress, like being isolated, how do we make sure we're very well of that, aware of that? Or maybe there's stress just in the workplace, like as a healthcare worker. But if there's any way we can support them and ask them how to normalize that stress, that's a huge component of being engaged. Well-being is a major contributor to engagement in organizations. The other part about that is just be flexible, right? You know, when people are stressed and going through these challenging times, they need control over their actions or things happening around them. So the ability to allow them to be flexible really lets them play within their new world, whatever that new world looks like going through a crisis. And I think most important is just check in and stay connected, right? That connectivity of checking in really makes an impact and lets your employees know that you care about their well-being. It's very simple. I put a thing in my calendar for 20 minutes. I reach out to a couple of people in the organization, whether it's through chat or on the phone, and I just say, how you doing? Anything we could do to help you? And again, just that ability to be cognizant about their well-being. The company may become, our organization may be in for more pain and more uncertainty. These are the people that are going to help you throughout those times when you take care of them first. So that was the third one. Keeping an eye on chat and questions here, not seeing any yet, but I want to get to the fourth one before the last part of the discussion. But the last thing that a really important approach to helping employees engaged through a crisis or through uncertainty is leaders are the most critical thing that you need at this moment. And what I mean by that is that you have to be clear about who's accountable. But the reality is that when a crisis hits or there's uncertainty, everyone says this is an HR issue, but this is not an HR issue, right? This is not something HR is going to fix. It's not something that they have to be accountable for. And the best way I can explain that is if you think about a crisis or uncertainty, most companies say, all right, this is an HR strategy, and then HR is going to figure it out for the business. But it's just the wrong approach. And I think the mindset you have to have is that we have a business strategy and our people are aligned to that. And that's not HR. It's every leader, every employee. And it really starts from a leadership perspective. If you have a small company, it's a few folks on your executive team. If you have a large company, it's the tens, hundreds, thousands of leaders that have to make sure that you're helping your company get out this and make sure employees are still engaged. So the point on this is that this is the mindset you need, right? In terms of understanding who's accountable for this. But the idea is you have to bring your leaders together and align them on why this is important, right? You will get more buy-in and support if your leaders are involved in making these decisions and around what we're going to do to make sure we're getting through this and keeping the employee's best interest in mind. And I always like to use this analogy, right? In a regular day outside of a crisis, you have your strategic direction in your company. What you're trying to accomplish is identified by your leadership team, and you have employees that do the work every single day, right? Now, in between there, right, are your leaders. They're the ones that are making sure the connection is there. They're making sure the communication is great. They're making sure that, if people have questions, there's an understanding of why the organization is going through that direction. But the moment you remove leaders from that equation, it's like removing a cog from a system, right? It falls apart. But in a crisis, it's even more important. There's going to be a lot of change, and employees are going to want to understand what the issue is, what the concerns, but they may not have a direct line to the executive team, right? They might only be able to talk to their direct leader. And if your company is big enough to have that hierarchy, again, your leaders are so important to make sure that communication and alignment is there. So a couple of points on that is bring your leaders together and make them understand what the company is trying to do, be part of the process, be explicit about them on why empathy is important. They need that reminder or train them. I've seen companies doing a lot of that right now. And the last part is promote more one-on-one conversations, right? It's really that concept of checking in. So if you make that part of the conversation and get your leaders there, you'll start seeing those engagement levels continue to stay steady or not drop as much during these types of uncertainty. And if you're looking around data on this, on the left side, again, a lot of data around employee engagement and leadership effectiveness. And when you start seeing companies in the 90th, 80th percentile, great leaders have a huge impact on engagement, right? When you have poor leaders, they're creating dissatisfaction. And I just wanted to use some data to let you know that when leaders are checking in, are having more conversations, again, they have a huge impact on engagement at the end of the day. There's a couple of studies out there that say that 80% of employee engagement, the variance of it is impacted by their leaders. So again, they're just super key in making sure you can get through this. And one of my favorite authors and quotes is, great leaders are willing to sacrifice the numbers to save the people. Poor leaders sacrifice the people to save the numbers. So I don't know if you're a leader of a whole organization on this call, just a team, part of one, but this is the conversation that your leaders, not HR, but all the leaders, executives, and every other person with a manager title is really important in making sure you get through these uncertain times, and you need their alignment and buy-in. So that being said, those are the 4 approaches, right? Make sure we're over communicating both ways, right? Not just the one way as we talked about. Second is adapt. Don't stop your engagement rituals and try to be creative given the times. A big one is emotional intelligence is way more important than regular intelligence in certain times. And the 4th is, again, this isn't an HR thing. This is your leadership time to rally and get together. Now, I mentioned that what I was going to end with was really some quick considerations. So where do you start once this crisis happens? Where do you start right now if you haven't really addressed it in your company? I always like giving some quick, tangible recommendations to kind of end it off before getting into any questions or discussion. So first things first is, where do you start? Just trust your employees, period. Your people may be working from home, their environment may be different. Just trust them at the end of the day. I always like doing this little exercise. So if you can bring up a calculator on your phone or calculator on your computer or wherever calculators are these days, I want you to do a favor. I want you to type into the calculator how many employees that you have in your organization. So hopefully everyone pulled that up, put their number in. Now I want you to multiply that number by 35,000. Okay. So I don't know what your number is. It might be small, it might be large, but let's say I was a company of 500 employees. 500 times 35,000 is 17.5 million. What 35,000 represents is that's as many decisions as a person makes in a single day. In one day, we as human beings, on average, make 35,000 decisions. You can't control, as a leadership team, as an HR team, whatever it is, that many decisions. So don't try. Right? At the end of the day, this many decisions are happening day in and day out about your organization. You need to trust your employees to be able to pull out and make the right decisions. Right? Whether they're in the office, whether they're not in the office, right? You already hired them, right? So my hope is that you trust them. But I always use that as a method to really put it into perspective, right? Like, you need to trust them whether they're in the office or not. And you need to trust them, again, even more so during this type of uncertainty and crisis. And I read this somewhere and I can never find the quote, but someone told me, or I read it, that you're building trust or you're eroding it. There's no in between, right? So when you're thinking about, getting your employees to be autonomous, right? And again, autonomy has a huge impact on engagement as well. Just trust your employees through uncertain times, right? They're going to make the right decisions at the end of the day. And if you're really concerned, then it might be thinking about the recruiting process in general. Really good example of this in non-uncertain times. Last company I used to work for, this was our employee handbook. Company was called Achievers. It said all Achievers employees use their common sense, have respect for others, grow professionally and personally, create value, and treat our shareholders' assets as if they were owned. It wasn't a 75-page book of policies and things for 1% of people that are going to mess up. It was, we trust you as adults. This is our employee handbook that fits on one business card, and we're going to trust you to make the right calls. Right? They're going to make a lot anyways, and you can't control it. So I always find this a really good first way is, if you're going to get through this, trust your employees to conduct the right actions and give them some direction to do it. Second, actions speak louder than words. And this is a quick one, but what's interesting is that a lot of things I was reading online was that there were these big statements by organizations saying, stay at home, but the whole executive team was sitting in the office, right? So again, whatever you do, the actions of your leaders are going to speak louder than anything you communicate through this type of uncertainty. And what's interesting is today there's a lot of issues out there with the Canadian government. Right? They just announced all these worries about paying people salaries, etc., but they just accepted all their raises apparently. I just read a quick headline, but people are freaking out, right? Because now you're making all these decisions for the country, but you're taking salary when money is at its most need. So again, just an example of something where how we react, that's how your employees would react if you're the ones conducting those types of things. The third is you may not have one. And again, even if you're a small company, but create a dedicated crisis team. What I mean by that is if you're 5 employees, 10 employees, that's your whole company, right? Make sure there's an executive sponsor, someone worried about communication. If something comes up, you can bring them together. If it's a large company, make sure you know who those people are, so you're not scrambling when something comes up. You get in a room and figure it out. And I always find having that accountability really engages employees, especially if they're part of those teams as well. Fourth is just lean on your community. Right? We are all, I keep hearing this is unprecedented times, and it is, right? No one knows what the heck to do with COVID-19, but lean on your community. Like a good example is I'm part of a group. It's called the People Group. It's a big Slack group of about 1,000 HR leaders. And every day there's someone sharing something great, or people can ask about, has anyone done X, Y, or Z? And especially when people are laying people off, using the new government, subsidy programs, whatever it is, there are other people there going through it with you. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? We used to call R&D wasn't research and development. It was rip off and duplicate. Find out what other companies are doing and find those communities that can help you. Because again, you're not in it alone. And if it's something that's more specific to you at this moment in time, people have been through it before, right? So I always find we forget to think about outside our company and ask for help. Think about it not just with our employees, but think about it with people in your community as well. And the last thing, kind of place you start, is just don't forget that in uncertain times, everything starts with your employees, right? You might be worried right now about financials and your company, but again, without employees, it's going to be hard to find success. And I always use this as an example. This is a service profit chain. What it means is if employees are doing the right things, then customers will be happy and shareholders will find success, right? But customers and shareholders, success, or however you define success to your company, profitability, those are outputs. You actually can't fundamentally change those tomorrow, but what you can change are the inputs. What employees do every day, the behaviors, the products they build, the services they provide, right? So if we're focusing on that, that's where you can start impacting better customer satisfaction, better products, better service, and better shareholder value. So throughout uncertain times, if you forget about the employee and think on the right side, your employees aren't going to be there to help you once you get out of the uncertain times. So again, last reminder, 5 considerations of where to start. Trust your employees. Actions speak way louder than words. Create that crisis team if you can. Lean on the people around you and think employee first. Usually always, but especially in these tough times. So, give yourself a checkbox, see if you've done all these, or show that to the team that you work with if this is a concern or issue. So last thing I want to mention, just final thoughts before happy to stick around for questions, is first, engaging your workforce is important during certain times more than ever, right? Think about it. These are the people that are going to be important to be able to carry you outside of these times. We have to take care of them first. The second is these are defining moments for you as a company or a leader. Like, you need to make an impact. A lot of the things you do right now are going to be really impactful on the brand you have as an employer after this crisis. We're actually talking about that in a webinar tomorrow. The third is just think long term. Remember, if your company was never off, like remote, and now it is, your workplace may never be the same. But expectations of employees will find a place that has that set up. Also, think long term. Set a retrospective after this. Sit down once this is all said and done with your leadership team, with your whole company, however big or small you are, and find out, what did we do well? What didn't we? We do that when we're building technology. We do retrospectives as an organization and teams. Why not do it through this crisis as well? And it'll help you the next time this comes up, hopefully not as much. So before I take questions, again, to win in this marketplace, you must first win in the workplace. And I think this is just a really good, and this is from Douglas Conant, who ran Campbell Soup for many years. This is really, I think, the last kind of good comment and the conversation. A lot of what we're talking about today is that when you engage your employees in uncertain times, you'll come out on top. And hopefully these ideas today gave you something interesting to think about and something tangible that you can take back into your organizations as well. So that being said, took a little longer than I wanted to. I wanted to leave at least 10 minutes, but I'll stay an extra couple of minutes if people can for any questions. And if this topic interests you, there's so many other resources, webinars, stuff on our website if you wanted to as well. So again, really appreciate everyone's participation, and TCC for having me. And feel free to write as many questions as you'd like in the chat or in the Q&A.
So just while we let people write up their questions, I have one for you, Rob. What's one thing that people can do right after this webinar to get started on engaging their employees? What would you recommend, like the very first thing for them to go off and do?
Yeah, so if they're not doing any of these things right now, I think it's the first part is that communication in the two-way. I think sitting down and saying, listen, we haven't responded, or we have. We want to know what the organization, like employees, think are going well, not any recommendations, because now it puts you in a frame of mind of how people are thinking or feeling. And I think once you have that data or that insight, now it gives you a sense of one, sentiment, and two, what you might be missing. And it really kind of formulates what you can do next. So I find that just that, and again, now employees in that sense are involved, right? They can be a part of it. So the way I'd usually structure those meetings is say, listen, we're going to get your feedback on what's been happening. We're going to answer any questions that you have. So kind of like an ask the leaders type thing. And then we're going to talk about what's going to happen next. And that might be decisions right there, or we're going to go back as our crisis team or leadership team and decide that. So I find that once you do that, employees are like, okay, they're on it. They care about our feedback. And then there's other ways that you can get them involved later when it comes to acting.
Right. Yeah. It kind of sets the tone, right, for the rest of the time, and the expectation that there's going to be a constant communication.
Yeah,
which I think
absolutely.
Is
important. Yeah. I did see a question come in. What do you think the way of working after the crisis in the whole world, correction just came in. So what do you think the way of working after the crisis in the whole world? Do you have some predictions? So I do fundamentally think that a lot of companies are going to change dramatically because of this, especially from a remote work environment. Like I think the concept of 9 to 5 is really going to be different in companies today, especially when they realize that their organizations could run when people weren't sitting in the same office every day. So I think that's one impact on organizations. I think that's going to have a huge impact on some industries. So, you think about, there's companies right now that are blowing up, not just orange juice, but delivery, home delivery, those types of things. But even real estate, right? Even a lot of the bigger companies have started to innovatively create offices, big buildings with less desks and chairs than their employee count, because they're doing hoteling and et cetera. And I think that'll be a reality as well, where I think real estate will change because people won't need large, giant offices anymore, because there's more understanding that people can get things done at home or a more remote basis. So I do think that there's a couple of the things that are easier to predict, but the peripheral impact of those things, gosh knows. But those are some things I think will, come to mind. But I can almost guarantee there will be some additional changes. We just don't know what those are right now or haven't seen those. It's a good question though. Oh, someone just asked another one. Nice. I may have missed this at the beginning, but when does over communicating become too much? Yeah, so I think I can't remember what the exact words are on that slide, but I always say you can't not over communicate, right? It's like things like your corporate values or your virtues or the stories around those types of things. I find that especially in a crisis, people need to be informed, whether they know it or not. It's funny when you talk about marketing a business or marketing a product, you say you need 7 touch points before someone actually remembers or understands, or, and that's kind of the adage when it comes to messaging from a marketing and sales perspective. But I truly believe that there's no such thing as over communication when it comes to these times. And remember, the over communicating sounds like it always has to be one way, but the two-way makes that communication very valuable to those folks. So that's actually a good, maybe a good tactic and tip is every time I'm thinking about communicating something again and again and again, which I do in our organization a lot, I always supplement that communication with, what do you want to know? What's not clear? And again, when it's not always one way, and it's more two-way, I find it's less communicating, it's more discussion. But I think that, obviously there's kind of a limit to it, but in these times, really tough, depending on the size of your organization as well. Another one came in. Can you share the last, second, or third slide about 5 summary points on engagement strategies? Well, we're definitely going to share the, everyone will get access to this recording. You'll get access to the slides. I'm looking at the other screen here to try and see which one you were looking at. See if I can get to that slide right now. But either way, you'll have access to all this stuff after the webinar as well. So I'm not sure if it was this one, but I'll keep that up for a bit if there's another question, and then I'll get on to the next side. The other one, the 5 approaches where to start after as well. Hopefully that helps, but Kay, we will be sending the slides. What about recruitment procedure? So that just popped up. Not sure exactly what the question is specifically. So if you can add any more color there, but here's a good example, maybe that will answer your question. So at Worktango, we're actually still actively hiring, right? And we're going through the same process and programs and interviews, et cetera. We've got to a couple of places where we've told people, listen, there's a lot of uncertainty right now, right? So perhaps we might make an offer with a unknown date, right? So we're still trying to keep people warm, still keep a recruiting pipeline if you are indeed recruiting through this time. But we're trying to just, again, being transparent to people at the beginning, saying, listen, we don't know what the true impact this is going to be in the organization in the next 3 or 4 weeks, which is how long the interview process is likely going to take. So as long as you're comfortable going through it, and if we want to move forward, we might have different approaches, let us know. And we've actually seen some really creative things. Some people have said, listen, I found grants that if I started this month, the government would pay the first month of my salary. And it's actually lend itself some interesting options. Recruitment procedures, I don't think change much. It's just kind of from a bit of caution, depending on, if you're recruiting or not. And then transformation and active hiring is also good points to add. Trying to make sense of that one.
Hey, Rob, it's Stephen here.
Yeah.
I see that this is obviously a kind of a hot topic right now, and we're actually planning a webinar or webcast for the 16th on how to hire, onboard, and train people remotely. So people might be interested in that session.
Okay. Yeah. So hopefully, thanks to Stephen, saved the day. Thanks for that. But yeah, I think there'll be some good points there as well. But I don't think that it changes dramatically. Some people have to think about onboarding, to your point, Stephen. Like, how do you get them the things they need if I can't meet them in person? And what are the process around that? And we'll be talking about some of those items on that webinar as well. Is it a question or comment? This is the most useful webinar I've ever joined. That makes me feel awesome. Thank you for the recognition. I wonder if there's any way I can rewatch it. So I think the TCC team, maybe you can explain what's going to happen next.
Yeah, so we're going to be uploading the replay of this video onto our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. So we'll be posting the links. So you should see it up probably around midday today. So you'll be able to rewatch it and save it and do what you need to do with it. And then I believe Worktango is going to have all the slides posted up on their website as well. So you can go back and forth between the two if you want to follow along.
Cool.
All right. So if anybody has any other questions, now's your chance. But otherwise, thank you, Rob. That was like really, as somebody who's worked in different leadership roles with different companies, this is really helpful because you kind of get to see, as you went through the slides, you kind of figure out who maybe was missing some key aspects in engagement with their employees. And, especially in a time like now, how it's very important to make sure that connection was there in the first place, but to maintain it throughout these uncertain times, because I'm sure as employers, it's just as uncertain for you guys. And to be able to make sure that doesn't come out, but that, you're united as a team. And there's an understanding that, nobody really knows what's going on, and it's important to stick together with that kind of stuff. So that was really good.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining. Nice to meet you all virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you guys for joining us.
Take care, everyone. See ya.
Thanks.